without the shed of blood, there can be no remission of sin. So blood has to be shed in order to remit sin. So there was one lamb that was set aside for the blood sacrifice, and then there was one lamb, the scapegoat, that was set aside to take away the sin. So what they did was that they would put their hands on the head of the lamb and symbolically taking the sins of the people and resting upon the land, and then would let the land loose into the wilderness. So the lamb would leave out of the camp. In other words, the sin was being led away into the wilderness. And so once the sin is being led away, now they take the second lamb that was sacrificed. This lamb and shed the blood to remit the sins. But the thing was, in the ceremonial law, in one area that it was weak, it did not give a complete atonement for sins. Because the people had the desire to obey the commandment of God, had the desire, but they did not have the ability. Now listen. But the moral law is here designed. This, though it can and does excuse of sin, can convince of it, can curse, condemn, and condemn to death for it, yet it could not condemn sin itself, which is only abolished by Christ. So what the moral law did, the moral law, because there was also the moral law. Because we talk about the ceremonial law, but there was also the moral law. The moral law were all the laws that the people of Israel had to follow. And the moral laws were all the different statutes for them as a people, the wrongs and the right, the do's and the do nots. That was the moral law. That was the law that they followed. But see, what the moral law did was, the moral law can accuse of sin. See, because if you read the book of the law, if you read in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, when it begins to talk about this, to mention these moral laws, not only did it mention the laws, but it also mentions the consequences for not following these laws. And so the moral law it will convince of sin, and it can also condemn or accuse of sin. So when a person was found guilty because of the law, because the law was already stated, the law was already written, and if someone breaks the law was there to accuse this individual of sin. So the law was there as an accuser. So that was what the law did. The law could accuse and condemn, even convict or condemn to death, because there was also some death penalties for certain sins that were committed, like adultery being one. That was a death penalty for certain sins that were committed in the time of the law. So the moral law could do that, but the moral law could not abolish sin. The moral law could not take away sin, but it can't. But what it did was it allowed man to see where they were. It allowed man to see that they were impoverished. It allowed man to see that how frail they were and that they were indeed sinful. And see, and over time, the Jews, the priests, and the high priests and carriers of the law, they have become so self-righteous with the law. They have become self-righteous with the letter of the law. They put a burden upon the people with the letter of the law. They become so self-righteous with it. And see, they missed the whole picture. They missed the whole point that the law was brought about to show us our sin, to show us what we were, to show us who we were. And that's what, and listen, it cannot restrain from sin, nor change the sinful nature, nor sanctify an impure heart, nor free from the guilt of sin, nor comfort a distressed mind under a sense of it. It cannot subject persons or bring them before God or give life or save from death. The reason is that you see, for what the law could not do. Those are things that the law could not do. The law could not abolish sin. The law could not free us from the guilt of sin. The law could not sanctify an impure heart. The law could not cause us to restrain from sin. Those are things that the law could not do. See, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. See, it was weak through the flesh. See, the law itself was not weak, it was weak through the flesh. Listen to this. The weakness of the law is total and universal. It has no strength at all, though not original and natural, but accidental. It is owing to the flesh, or the corrupt nature of man, or rather the weakness is in sinful men, and not in the law. The weakness was in sinful men. The weakness was in us. The weakness is not in the law. And see, we were weak because of the law was weak, and it was not that the law was weak, it was because of sinful man. The reason why the law couldn't do these things. The law was weak through the flesh. As I said, the law was weak in the flesh. Through the flesh, it was weak. When the law brought about to man, it was weak because the law couldn't something. And not, or rather the weakness is in sinful men and not in the law. And the sense is this, that human nature is so wicked by sin that it is incapable of fulfilling the law. The human nature is so weak by sin, it's incapable of fulfilling the law. It was not one man, it was not one person in history that was able to completely fulfill this law. Though the Pharisees were so self-righteous in the law, they didn't fulfill the law because their heart wasn't right. And the law talks about the matters of the heart. Their heart wasn't right. They weren't fulfilling the law either. The weakness of the law is not from itself, but from man. The weakness of the law was not from itself, but from man. Listen. That the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. So for what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God sent his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. In order for the righteousness of the law to be fulfilled, God had to send Jesus to shed his blood for our sins, that the law may be fulfilled in us. And that's the only way we're righteous, and through the blood of Jesus Christ. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit, being led by the Spirit. If we're not led by the Spirit, we mind the things of the flesh. Even those that are spiritual, even those that are led by the Spirit, those that are spiritual or consider ourselves spiritual. If we're not led by the Spirit in certain situations, we're gonna fall after the things of the flesh. And we find it in our life, and we're not allowing God to lead us in the right direction. We're not seeking God concerning a certain situation, a certain thing, or a certain prayer, or a certain decision. When we don't seek the guidance of the Spirit, when we don't seek the guidance of God, then we'll find ourselves leading or going after the flesh. And going after the flesh doesn't always necessarily mean doing some simple things, but it means answering things according to our flesh, according to man's logic, and according to the way we think we ought to answer those things. And so it said in verse 6 that for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Be carnally minded is death. There's death in the carnal mind. When we follow after the flesh, there's death that's there. And see, death brought about many things. In the garden, God told Adam, if you eat of every tree in the garden, but if you eat of the tree in the midst of the garden, you shall surely die. And the command was given to Adam, and Adam had also transferred and given the commandment to Eve, let her know what God required of them. And he only had one thing required of them, that they did not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so he come Satan, the serpent, Satan possessed a serpent and came and said, if you eat, you won't surely die. And see, Satan, he knew something. Satan had an insight, and he understood that the death was coming, that they was going to die. But the first thing in our mind when we hear the word death, we think of a natural death. We think of dying naturally. But the death was the death was manifold. The death was not only a natural death, but it was a spiritual death. And it brought about death with separation from God. It also brought about sickness, and it also brought about suffering, and also brought about strife and envy, and all the things that come from sin. See, that's what God said, you shall surely die. Means you open up the door and the gateway for sin to come into the world.